Not everyone is allowed access to see inside a sprint car trailer, and they are definitely not all the same. What's inside them, and more importantly, how are they different? In this video, I'm gonna tell you. Hey everyone, are you in business for yourself? Maybe you own and run a transport business and are eyeing off a new truck or trailer, or maybe you're a tradesman needing another essential tool. Well, here's a game changer for you. Check out Credit One Equipment Finance. They are Australia's top choice for financing for good reason. Whether it's transport, construction, farming, or any trade, Credit One Equipment Finance is perfect for your business. No matter your industry or equipment needs, Credit One Equipment Finance is your go-to solution. They understand that growing your business means having the right equipment and tools, which often requires substantial investment. With Credit One's diverse finance options, you can acquire your excavator, van, truck, crane, or whatever your job demands. But hey, don't just take my word for it. Check out over 1,800 glowing 5-star reviews on Google. That's right, 1,800 and counting. For competitive rates and solutions that beat the banks, and for lightning fast loan approvals, visit www.creditoneequipmentfinance.com.au or click the link in the video description below. Empower your business today with Credit One Equipment Finance. Trailers, transporters, haulers, rigs, whatever you want to call them, for some reason, there's just something special about them. It's like having a nice, tidy home, but for your race team. Okay, so we can't get stuck into this without explaining some of the differences, okay? Firstly, yes, there are many different types of sprint car rigs out there, and depending on the team size, how much they travel, and how much equipment they may want to take to the track, they're all different. And yes, some may have toter homes. Australian teams can have B doubles, but for this video, we're just gonna focus on the most common of big rigs. But even the biggest of rigs aren't the same, even when just looking purely at size. What I mean by that is the big rigs you see in the USA and Australia aren't entirely the same. In short, they're different sizes, which mean they are laid out a little bit differently. Now, there's a lot of different laws depending on which state you're in and what permits you have, but in simple terms, the overall length of an American rig is about 75 foot, while an Australian rig has a maximum length of 19 meters overall. So that 12.5 feet, or almost 4-meter difference, dictates the truck and trailer combination, the internal trailer layout, and how much equipment a team might travel with. All of the dimensions are different, really. American trailers are slightly wider by about 3.5 inches, or around 90 millimeters, and it's the Australian rigs that are slightly taller by almost 7.5 inches, which is around 189 millimeters. These measurements are only slightly different, but still, that can make a decent difference when trying to maximize how much a team can load into the trailer, especially with the huge amount of space taken up by just the sprint car and mule alone. The only other relevant difference that I wanted to point out is that Americans drive on the right-hand side of the road, but the driver sits on the left, and in Australia, it's the opposite. Yes, that is obvious to some, but not everyone knows that. With that, the side access to a trailer is also on opposing sides. All right, with all of that said, let's get inside the trailer. Let's start at the back and work our way forward. And I should preface this by saying that although there are some more minor differences, most are laid out pretty much as I'm about to explain. The car obviously goes in last and sits at the back, so the trailer is fairly open here. Above the left rear is usually where a wheel balancer sits, and above the right rear, you'll find a fold-down bench that also holds a few consumables. This is more often than not the bench known to be the tire chief's workstation. Directly above the car is where teams will fit a spare top wing, and a couple more will fit in front of that. Then we get into the cupboards, which gradually get deeper as the walkway narrows. Still, the cupboards can't be too deep because the mule needs to fit in between them. The mule is basically a mobile toolbox and parts carrier, but we'll explain all of that in a separate video. The first set of cupboards might house some wheel and tire fitting equipment, gear sets, or even methanol fuel churns. You'll usually find an air line and an electrical lead reel around here too. In front of those cupboards is where you'll find spares for rear ends, front ends, drive lines, radius rods, other steering components, and maybe even a steering box. A lot of the bulkier spares for the car. In all of these cupboards, there's a mix between parts to adjust the car setup and spare parts in case something goes wrong. Around this area is where not all, but some of the more modern trailers have doors. This keeps the heat and dust out and is where the team can yell at each other in private. Okay, so what's behind these doors? Firstly, you'll run into a lot of toolbox drawers. This might be my favorite part. These drawers are filled with expensive parts, and I hate to think of what all of these titanium parts are worth. And it's just a beautiful thing to look at. Nuts, bolts, arms, Jacob's ladders, pumps, lines, hoses, brackets, mounts, so much stuff. Basically, any spare car component that can fit in these drawers is stored here. Another thing that I think is important to point out is that a lot of these parts aren't just buy and throw it in the trailer. The idea is to have as many options as possible in different configurations in case of an emergency. For example, if a car has a problem with the wing ram, teams will want to have a spare wing ram on its own, a wing ram with hoses and adjuster valve, and maybe an entire assembly where it's connected to a steering gear. Now, every trailer is laid out differently depending on its length, which means there may be more cupboards with more spares and tools, but either way, pretty much whatever side the tire rack is on, the engine cupboards and workbench are on the opposite side. The workbench is where you'll often find the crew chief setup book, outlets for power and air, and a vise. You should find a shock dyno around here too. Every serious team has one, especially if they're on the road. Right next to the workbench is usually a cupboard for the driver to store their helmet. Every driver needs a spot to clean their helmet and add tear-offs, and right next to the crew chief is ideal for talking about the car setup. You'll notice that the workbench is at a standing height, and that creates a good sized compartment below for the spare engines. These spare engines, along with an engine in the car that's being raced and an engine in one or two of the spare cars, mean a trailer can hold up to 6 or so engines at any one time. That is a lot of money in engines alone. Again, the idea is that these engines are as ready as possible with a universal joint, an airbox, gauge panels, and maybe even a radiator mounted, ready to go to do an engine swap in a hurry. This means teams can undo the headers and the 6 bolts holding the engine in, yank the old one out, and put a fresh engine in within about 8 to 10 minutes. It's pretty impressive to watch. You know what's also impressive? Seeing our subscriber count grow. So if you're enjoying this content, make sure to click subscribe down below so we can keep making these videos for you. And if you have already clicked subscribe, don't forget to head over to sprinkerhub.com to grab our latest gear that people from all over the world are wearing. So back to the other side, which is where the tire rack is. Ideally, you'd want this compartment to be towards the back of the trailer because the tires always get so dirty, but that can't really happen because sprint car tires take up so much room and we already need the car and mule to fit towards the back. In this tire rack, most teams will have placed the spare trailer tire, maybe a couple of spare fronts, and the rest is for a few right rears, but mostly left rear tires so they have plenty of options when adjusting stagger. You'll notice that the ceiling is much lower in this area, and that's because there's an entire mezzanine level right above. A ladder will be mounted on the wall and a lot of spare equipment is kept up here, more so the bigger stuff. With slightly shorter rigs in Australia, you're likely to see just one spare car up here. In the States though, a car that is almost completely ready to go will be at the back, and that will typically have everything but a top wing and rear wheels on it. And I mean, it might even have fuel in it ready to go. Sometimes when a driver has a decent wreck, it's just quicker and easier to get the spare car down than thrash to get the wrecked car all fixed up. So you're probably wondering, how do they get the spare cars up there? A couple of small crane hoists will slide on a track right in the center of the upper ceiling. In front of that car, you'll see a kit car, which is basically just a frame with panels on it, and not much else, if anything. If the other 2 cars are wrecked, teams will have to finish building this one ready to race. Apart from that, you'll find spare headers with different muffler combinations, spare Nerf bars, wheels, a fuel tank, usually a stash of tires, and some nose wings. Although it can quickly get pretty busy up here, it is a big space, so some trailers may even have cupboards that house a lot of consumables. Remember, These teams can be away from their shop for a couple of months at a time and may have an oil sponsor, so they don't want to run out when on the road and have to buy any of it. So that means they might have to pack engine oil, gear oil, coolant, power steering fluid, brake fluid, sprays like brake cleaner, carby cleaner, there's soap, rags, all kinds of things. I will say it's pretty rare for fans to see inside this area because there's a big tarp at the back that blocks it all off, and teams aren't gonna just let you walk on up there. The final part is the fanciest part of the trailer, and that is the lounge area. A few small steps lead into this where there's aircon, maybe a small kitchen with a fridge and microwave, usually a toilet and maybe a shower, a TV, and maybe some fold-out beds. It's not an absolute necessity to have this or even a lot of what's inside these trailers, but this area is ideal, particularly when you're constantly on the road. I've lived and worked on the road in these things, and it's nothing like a normal 9-to-5 job. Some weeks are hectic and you just don't stop racing, and at other times you're just waiting around for days on end until the next race. So having an area where you can chill definitely is appreciated. It really is a mobile workshop and home all in one. You're obviously interested in the inner workings of sprint car racing if you've watched up until this point. Make sure you click subscribe, and for your next video to watch, check out how sprint car parts are made.